Yes, it's time for The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the International Herald Tribune. Eric Fanner of the Trib is here. How are you?
Good to be back.
Also with us, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet of the Sunday Telegraph. How are you?
Hello.
Celestine Bolen, who's looking suspiciously tan, as we mentioned earlier. And Stefan de Vries of RTL4, and who caught the red eye this morning back from that summit in Brussels. We'll talk about that in a moment. The World This Week that you can follow on Facebook, and you are in growing numbers, and also on Twitter at François F24 is our handle here. First, though, the most stubborn tug-of-war, you could call it, of the Arab uprising, once again on full display this Friday. More than 1.2 million protesters across Syria calling for the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad. These images from the city of Latakia. Last week, the focus was on Hama, where again there were people out in the streets this Friday, thousands slaughtered in that town back in 1982. Protests still going on there. And since last Saturday, the focus has shifted to Homs. More than 50 killed in that city. Activists, since last Saturday, activists accuse the regime of trying to stoke sectarian strife between Christians and Muslims. And we keep waiting, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, for this to give one way or the other. I'm just astounded by the sheer number of people that are once again out in the streets.
I'm amazed because that's more than 1/10 of the entire population of the country in the streets. There has been talk of flotillas going to protest the Gaza, the situation in Gaza, but really there needs to be a flotilla for Latakia. And it's very close. The boats are almost ready. Give them back and go to Latakia and do something. It's as if there was selective indignation. And this happens in Syria comparatively with nobody paying much attention to it.
Nobody paying much attention, and what is concentrating, though, the minds once again is amateur video footage. And on the France 24 Observer's website, for instance, we've gotten some startling images from Homs of young men being arrested, having bits of their shirts ripped to serve as handcuffs. There you see those images. A startling image because, as our editor, Julien Pain, was pointing out, these are filmed from really up close, Eric Fanner, which leads us to believe that it's probably security men themselves who filmed this amateur footage.
And it makes you wonder how it got out, right? Obviously, and how it'll be used potentially against them, which is a bit worrying.
I mean, we've talked about how the limits of what you can get out of amateur footage. What we're seeing now is that those who are getting this footage out every Friday are getting more and more sophisticated, making sure that they either have a newspaper or a note or something. How do you sift through all of that, though?
That's a good question. I mean, and whether it's authentic or not, this clearly looks quite authentic. But you obviously have to have some good editing there.
One of the other troubling aspects is when the army and security forces are not out in force, there's more and more talk about the notorious Shabia militias taking over, Stefan de Vries. And we've put a lot of the focus, obviously, because there's a war at Europe's doorstep with Libya. Syria has slightly slipped off the radar.
Well, I think it hasn't slipped off the radar, but the Western countries are not really interested or not very keen on intervening in Syria because it's a completely different country and there are all other strategic aspects that are playing a role, and that's the reason why we are not there, which I think is of course understandable, but it is a mistake because the same things are happening in Syria as happened before in Libya, and that was reason enough to go into war with Libya. So why we're not going into Syria? And nobody actually really raises the question. It's just more or less wavered away. And I think it's really remarkable how resilient the Syrian people are. And I think I don't know what to do, but I think we, as Europe at least, we should give a very strong signal that we in with them and that we want to support them, and instead of staying silent.
It's Celestine Bolen. Again, this has been going on since mid-March.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, again, it's this sort of, impasse because things are attempted at the Security Council, vetoes are threatened, so that goes into a kind of a dead end. I think it's absolutely clear that going in any kind of unilateral or Eurolateral way would be completely out of the question. For all the strategic implications. And I mean, can this be that this then gives him a free hand? I mean, it seems a sort of a shocking thing to sort of say this country is so important that we can ignore what's happening. I mean, that's a kind of a paradox.
The other thing is that these are incredibly brave people. I mean, the revolution, it's very good that the earlier Arab revolutions were bloodless. But I mean, this is not bloodless. These are people being tortured. There's this young boy who was taken back to his family, and he'd been emasculated, and he'd tortured, he'd been cut to pieces, and in sort of this insulting gesture, and then he was thrown to his family back. We're talking about the kind of thing that are atrocities, and there's not a shred of indignation, sort of going, above the general sort of whisper that something must be done, and nothing is done. And I'm amazed that we have this selective indignation that we can go sort of all full of admiration and do sort of 3-hour specials on what's going on in Egypt, and then, oh, this is Syria, it's bad what's happening in Syria. Yes, it's very bad.
Well, it has to be said, it's hard to get in. I mean, and again, this issue of how do you trust what you get. Unfortunately, it just shows that despite Facebook, or in spite of Facebook and all the new media and all the rest of it, having eyewitnesses from credible media using, credible means of getting the story out is actually still very, very important.
I was going to say, having Anthony Shadid of the New York Times, whose pieces were run in the Herald Tribune, with a photographer, in a way, it doesn't add to the credibility, but it confirms it in a sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know if that contributes to the...
For all of us who are on the outside looking in.
Right, no, exactly. I don't know internally if it adds to the 1.2 million people in the street, but certainly it does raise the profile. I mean, we're talking about it here. It's not being ignored.
No.
We're going to also talk about the issue that's really worried everyone around the world this past week, which is the state of Europe, its currency, and really the sovereignty of some of its nations. There was a major summit that took place on Thursday. At least you can say is that leaders bought themselves some time this Thursday. Markets closing the week on a stable note after a summit in Brussels where the continent made a major move towards the creation of what you could call the Eurozone equivalent of the IMF, a fund to bail out the likes of Greece should it get any worse, and it sure can. Germany and France promising to sit down in August for a major rethink of it all, and private banks committing to take at least a partial hit on their Greek endeavors. But the devil's in the detail. Private investors allowed on a voluntary basis to convert short-term bonds into longer-term treasury notes. Hence, French daily newspaper Libération still scratching its head this Friday and asking who's going to pay in big block letters on its front cover. Stéphane de Vries, you were at that summit. Are you still scratching your head?
Yeah, actually, and I'm not the only one, because last night with all the journalists in the big press room of the European Council, we were actually wondering what really happened and what was going to happen, and there was a big debate about what the amount of money was that is involved in this new aid package, and some people thought it was 109 billion, other people talk about 159 billion, and several member states give several numbers as well, so it's completely unclear what actually they really decided. And like you mentioned, the private sector involvement is only on a voluntary basis. There are no indications on how they are going to pay. So it's completely unclear, and I'm not very optimistic after last night, even though Sarkozy presented as it was a very historic step in the euro history, but I'm more skeptical.
You're more skeptical. So
Yeah.
if the market's stabilized, is it because they believe that there is finally a clear signal of something that's going to happen? Or is it because they feel that they're going to make some more money out of this. Right
Well,
now, in the short
Fitch, the rating agency, already downgraded threatened to downgrade Greece to make it a partial default. Very technical, but it basically means that the rating agencies say that Greece is no longer able to pay its debt, which is a very bad sign, and that happened this afternoon. So that already indicates that the program or the new aid package that has been proposed last night is not really, not enough.
Not enough. And if Stefan de Vries is scratching his head, he's not alone in the column that'll be in Saturday's Trib. Paul Krugman, merciless. He says, on Thursday, the heads of state or government of the Euro areas and EU institutions, that mouthful tells you all by itself how messy European governance has become, issued their big statement. It wasn't reassuring. For one thing, it's hard to believe that the Rube Goldberg financial engineering the statement proposes can really resolve the Greek crisis, let alone the wider European crisis. Rube Goldberg, by the way, an early 20th century cartoonist whose intricate inventions include, there you see it, the self-operating napkin or the toothpaste squeezer. Celestine Bolin, are we being a little too harsh here?
I feel that way. I mean, it's sort of more about my feelings than perhaps my analysis, which, first of all, I don't have all the details. I wasn't there. I haven't analyzed it in print, for instance. So, but the fact is, you feel like they've crossed all these lines. The ECP didn't want the bank involvement, and that line was crossed. In fact, the bonds have been lengthened and the rates have been reduced. I mean, making it perhaps more possible for the Greeks to pay. There's an understanding that you can't keep squeezing and then expect them to grow. It seems so simple and basic, but I think honestly that was part of what sort of went on, is that Greece needs help if it's going to kind of dig itself out of this. So I feel like there were certain things that were conclusions reached that are helpful, that are courageous, that were not easy. There was a lot of fighting going on over this. So, it's easy to knock, but it's perhaps just the best that they could have done under the circumstances, which may or may not be enough. But I don't think that we can call that yet.
So perhaps
if the markets aren't calling it, how do we know? In a way, whether this is enough or how long it will be enough. When is too long? I think it's a lot of.
Is there a sense, picking up on what Celestine said, that grudgingly, necessity being the mother of invention, Europeans are having to redefine the way they run their finances on a Eurozone-wide scale, at least?
Yes, and I would say pragmatism is not necessarily a good thing, because we can see that all those wonderfully crafted systems, crafted by bureaucrats in good times, do not necessarily work. So sometimes the sense of urgency might be a good thing. But my opinion on this one is, yes, there is a Euro crisis, yes, there is a Greek crisis, and it is scary, but you can see some determination within what is 1/3 of the world economy, of the world GDP, still Europe. Something sort of pretty. There's enough determination that I think the markets trust it, which is why we see the close of the stock exchanges going slightly up. For instance, in the case of the French bourse, we have a real crisis on our hands, and that's the dollar crisis, and that is much, much, much worse. The United States might not be able to find a package to finance its debt, and we're talking about larger numbers, and we're talking about something that's hooked that is interconnected in the world economy in ways that makes the Greek crisis look like.
But speaking as a good journalist there, you mentioned how the Europeans work to deadline. I can see that's the voice of experience speaking. The Americans...
I hope they keep to their deadlines better than I do. But
the Americans, they have till August 2nd.
The Americans have till August 2nd, but the Americans have got an ideological discourse on this that the Europeans do not have so much. And I think the danger really is in America. I think the European crisis is not because you have one huge crisis looming and the other crisis is not big. But I think the real danger for the world economy is on August the 2nd.
Yeah, I do agree, and I would like to add that the United States of America is in far worse shape than the European Union. But there's one big difference, and I think that's the real issue here, is that the United States have a president, and there's a leadership, and that's the real institutional crisis that we're facing here, I think the euro is just a phenomenon of something much bigger, which is the institutional crisis. Because if you look at the importance of the Greek economy, it's really nothing. It's only 2% of the European economy. Even the 150 billion that's being discussed since yesterday is a relatively small amount. It's maybe a lot of money to you or me, but it isn't on a large European scale if you watch the numbers of the European economy. But the real problem here is the institutional problem, and there's no leadership in Europe, and they're not able to address this problem. And so the only choice, in my opinion, is either we stop the European Union and we just continue as some kind of free trade zone with bilateral trade agreements, or we're going into the direction of a real federation, but we cannot continue the way we're doing it right now.
And the problem is there that there's a sense that this is going to keep coming up every 6 months, every year. And
yes,
with the U.S.,
we'll continue
there's
like
the one
this.
deadline, August 2nd, and there's going to be a lot of grandstanding and horse trading before then, but people have a sense that after that there'll be a solution, however bad it might be.
And even last night, I mean, Sarkozy was talking about it's the beginning of a European Monetary Fund. 5 minutes later, I spoke to the Dutch Prime Minister and asked him the question what he thought about that. And he said, no, there won't be any, I don't know what you're talking about. And I asked him, were you sitting on the same table as Nicolas Sarkozy? And he said, yes, but there won't be such a thing as a European Monetary Fund. And it was only 5 minutes after the end of the summit. So that shows that even the 17 leaders that were there last night have no clue what they're talking about.
And by the way, still at the end of Thursday's summit, despite debt contagion, the boss of the European Central Bank warning in no uncertain terms, this is a one-off.
What is important, in our view, is the recognition that Greece is an absolutely exceptional situation, and that for that reason it requires exceptional and unique solutions, but that all other euro area countries reaffirm solemnly their inflexible determination to honor fully their own individual sovereign signature.
Absolutely an exception. I'll get your reactions to all this when we come back. And we'll also be looking at the week that was for a certain Rupert Murdoch. Stay with us. The World This Week continues.